Welcome back to another episode of Cold Red. I'm Ray Carr, and with me always is Fitz. Our guest today is Jake Adelstein. Jake is speaking with us from Tokyo, Japan, where he is a reporter, author, and human trafficking advocate. His book, Tokyo Vice, was adapted into a series which is available on HBO Max. The series was produced by Michael Mann and stars Kevin Wannabe and Ansel Elgort, who portrays the lead role of Jake Adelstein to the show. Jake, welcome to Cold Red. It's a pleasure to have you today.
Thank you for having me on the show. I am an anti-human trafficking advocate. I know it's early in the morning here and late there, but not a human trafficking advocate.
I'm sorry if I messed.
No, it's okay. It's okay. It's man, I am so bad at reading like prepared documents that I get them wrong all the time.
You're not the Lone Ranger.
We were pretty sure you were anti-human trafficking, and thank you for the work you're certainly doing in that. You're, I believe, from Missouri originally, or Missouri, depending how you pronounce it.
It depends on where I am in. If I'm in Columbia, the college town, it's Missouri. If I'm in McBain, Missouri, which is pretty much where I grew up, I'm Missouri, because it's an important distinction.
Interesting how that plays out, and we're going to come back to that town because we know first your father, he was a pathologist, and then you were involved in a case of a sort of angel of death matter in Columbia, Missouri, or Missouri, depending where you're listening to this from. So we'll come back to that. But I know Ray's curious. How does a guy from the Midwest wind up basically living most of his adult life in Tokyo?
Well, like the bank robber you caught, the 30-year-old, the Friday night robber, I was really into karate. Got into karate in high school. I never got a third-degree black belt. That's really horrible. I've never been very good at any of martial art. But in college, there was a chance to study abroad at Sophia University. I lobbied that I should go because actually they wouldn't let me go when I applied because I'd only had a year of Japanese experience. But since there was absolutely no one going from the University of Missouri in this exchange program, I argued it's not much of an exchange program if you don't have someone from our side going. So that argument won the day, and I did get to go to Japan. And I was there about 2 or 3 months and then ran into someone and ended up teaching a Zen Buddhist priest English for a while. And then he offered to let me live in the temple. And this was the bubble period of Japan where everybody was like making money hand over fist. So no one wanted to be a Zen Buddhist priest. So they had space. So I lived there. And after a couple of years, I was like, after about 2 years in Japan, I was like, I'm probably going to stay here because it's such an interesting, strange place. I mean, I have been here since 1988, pretty much uninterrupted. And I still find Japan to be this wonderfully different culture that is almost like visiting another planet in Star Trek.
I read your last chapter, and you mentioned the time in 1988 you were living in the temple. I know you had 3 rules of which you had to abide. Would you care to share that with our audience?
I had to keep my hair cut short. I mean, not as short as a Zen Buddhist priest. I couldn't have women in my room after 5 p.m. And I had to show up for Zazen every Sunday morning before 7 o'clock, which meant getting there by 6:30 a.m. It wasn't hard because I'd just go downstairs. As a matter of fact, I'm still good friends with my landlord, the Zen Buddhist priest. Tomorrow I have this ritual, which I'm supposed to help out with, which I can only describe as kind of a mass exorcism where you send off hungry ghosts, sort of people who haven't been able to go over to the other side. I mean, this is sort of a Japanese folk belief that, when people die and they die in unfortunate circumstances, that their spirits linger and don't go on to the next incarnation, and that sometimes they need a helping hand. And actually, this is something that the police often say when they're trying to get someone to confess to a crime. It's like, if you don't admit to the crime and you don't accept your punishment, the person you killed is never going to be going on to the next world. Do you want that on your conscience, including what you've already done? You've assigned this person to permanent limbo and purgatory. And sometimes that's enough to convince people to say, okay, yeah, I did it.
That's their version of the Miranda warnings, right? I'm sure with a Japanese name to it.
In Japan, it's very interesting. You guys are both from law enforcement, so you might find this actually a great idea. When you are arrested, they can hold you up to 23 days without indicting you, at which point you do not have access to your lawyer while you're being interrogated. You do have the right to remain silent. That is about it. And until 2019, there was no plea bargaining either.
And just finishing up your early days, or at least 1988, I got a kick out of the significance of the date of March 28th. It was obviously the title the title of your final chapter. And it was one important date for you, but I like how these Buddhist priests sort of flipped it around on you. Tell us a little bit about that.
So Nyogen is my Zen master. I don't know, there's not a better word in English that doesn't sound so pretentious. I mean, my landlord, my buddy, I think we're about 16 years apart in age. And when he was trying to convince me that I should be his disciple and his successor, we had this long discussion of why that was difficult. And then he, and I said, look, if I was going to do this, I'd probably do it on my birthday so I could remember what the date was. I told him my birthday, which was March 20th, 1969. And then he said, that's amazing because that's when I took my my vows to become a Zen Buddhist priest at the age of 15. And I had that look on my face like, yeah, like tell me another one. And so he went up and he brought down this photo album of him at 15, getting his head shaved and taking the vows. And I looked at the date. So Japan has two different date systems. They have the imperial date system based on the lives of the emperor, and they have the Western system. So 1969 in the imperial calendars show off 44. So I looked at the date of his album and I said, oh, wow, that's amazing. Like, you became a Zen Buddhist priest on the day I was born. And then he corrected me, said, no. You were born on the day I became a Zen Buddhist priest. So this is karma. You should be my disciple and you should take the vows. And so he convinced me. And then that same year, 2017, I became ordained, registered Zen Buddhist priest. And I'm still doing it. I have have either of you guys been in the Army?
My was career Army brat, though, Jake, where my father was in there for 23 years.
Soto Zen Buddhism is has this sort of army thing where if you don't grade up after 10 years, you get thrown out. So in the next year, next 2 years, I have to, rise to the next level of Zen Buddhist priest or I get kicked out. So part of that training is to answer one of these incredibly weird Zen riddles, like what is the sound of one hand clapping? You get kind of tested on that, like a defend your thesis thing as a graduate student. So that's coming up next year. I am probably the most agnostic Zen Buddhist priest in the world because I don't know if I actually believe in the metaphysics, but I like the idea, right? I like the idea of karma. I like the idea that, what you do, good and bad, comes back to reward you or bite you on the ass. So theoretically, I find that a very nice philosophy.
Is that a direct quote from their dogma? It'll bite you in the ass.
Sort of. I'm sort of taking it loosely. There is some humor in Zen Buddhism. Supposedly, one of the answers to what is the sound of one hand clapping is you slap the person in the face, because that is the sound of one hand clapping. Probably the only really funny joke in religious history.
I was going to say, I don't think the Bible has anything like that.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
So one last question, I'll let Ray kick in here, but I assume you speak Japanese fluently.
I speak and write Japanese fluently. My father says it's an idiot savant thing. I would prefer to just think of it as hard work, but I went to college here. When I graduated, I got a job with a Japanese newspaper called the Yomiuri Shimbun, which is still the largest newspaper. 1993, when I entered, they had 10 million readers a day, which is just huge. Or rather, I should say, they had 10 million copies printed each day. There was always this joke is like, well, how many people are reading those copies? But $10 million issues a day was their circulation.
That's the most important number.
That is an important number.
So, obviously there's no Japanese family members. You weren't speaking it since you were 7 or 8. You basically started learning Japanese in college.
Yeah, I started learning in college. I guess, in karate, you're learning like the basic terms like moashigiri and maigiri, but that's not particularly useful in day-to-day life. Here is an interesting thing about the Japanese language. And when I realized this, these two things, it was kind of like my epiphany. First thing is the verb comes at the end of the sentence. And that gives you this ability to negate exactly what you said as you're watching someone's face. So you could say like, I think it's a great idea to, vote for Proposition 22, not. And the verb is where it ends. So it's kind of like the sentences is in reverse. And the other thing is that there is no pretense of equality in Japan. Everything is based on this idea that there's a hierarchy, and that shows up in the language. And that means when you address someone, there are honorifics. Everybody knows like san. Above that is sama. There's kun, which you can use for like a colleague or an equal. There's chan, which you could use for like someone you're really, really close with or in a joking way. And then there's not calling anyone by anything, by just calling by their name. which is called yobiste, literally throwing away someone's name. And that is insulting. That is one of the most insulting things you could do to someone in Japanese. I mean, there are about 5 or 6 different words for you and a bunch of different words for I. Japanese doesn't require pronouns, so you don't really need it. But to call someone without any honorific at all is the equivalent of saying, like, fuck you. It's really, really, really rude. And when you're speaking Japanese, you know, and one of the reasons why, you always see Japanese exchanging business cards is because I need to know what your status is in society, or what your status is in the company, or what your status is in relation to me, so I can figure out how to talk to you properly. And that's, as an American, that's kind of a little weird because we call each other by our first names, and our assumption is that we're kind of equals. But Japan is very much a vertical society. And if you want to speak the language, whether you like it or not, you have to accept this is where I am in the society.
And there's certainly a patriarchy there too. And Ray, I'm a linguist, so I'm fascinated in other languages, especially second language learning later in life. You were still in your late teens, whatever. But I know with women, young women have to address older males, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a whole different pronoun system and some of the honorifics that you mentioned. And eye contact and matters such as that, I believe, it make a big difference in any sort of discourse.
As times have changed, the difference between women's language and men's language has changed a lot. But still, if I say ore ga kono bangumi ga daisuki desu, I really love the show. Ore is like a very male one, right? If a woman would say ore, with meaning I, people would look at her like, okay, are you joking? Do you identify as a man? Are you a lesbian? But, that's not appropriate for you as a woman to say. It'd be atashi or watashi or no, but not ore. So there is this idea that certain pronouns belong to men, certain pronouns belong to women. And there's, and definitely there's an expectation that women are going to be more polite, but the hierarchy system can become very complicated, like say within a company. So when I was sent to the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department to cover organized crime and vice in about 2003, there was Murai-san, and she was younger than me in the company, like a couple of years younger, right? So in the senpai is the senior, kohai is the junior system. She is below me, right? So I should be able, not that I should be, but, in Japanese studies, typically I would be ordering her around, right? I would be, because in the company I'm older than her. But within the police beat, she had been there so many years before me that she was superior. So I had to address her with san, and I had to bring her tea when she wanted to. And if I wanted to, not do a story or wanted to do something else that she asked me to do, then I had to really either politely ask her, or I had to go above and talk to the captain of the team to do that, because in that ecosphere, she is the superior, and therefore she deserves more respect because she has more experience.
Last question, I promise, as a linguist. It's one thing speaking a language and, of course, understanding it. It's another thing writing it. In Germanic and Roman languages, of course, it's the Roman alphabet. You use characters when you're writing Japanese, or do you use the more phonetic Roman alphabet type of usage?
So Japanese has kanji, which are Chinese characters, which are adopted from China. And the Japanese gave them Chinese pronunciations and Japanese pronunciations. And sometimes one character has several different pronunciations. They have a syllabary, which your language, which is different from an alphabet. Because, I, U, O is the sound is the character. And then they have katakana, which is an angular version of the syllabary, mostly used for foreign words. So, I'll show you. This is the cover of a Yakuza fan magazine. Up until 2018, there were a monthly Yakuza fan magazine with all the bosses and stuff on it. But you can see that these characters here, that's katakana. This character up here is kanji. And then you have some hiragana here and there. So there's articles like Futatsu no Aizu Kotetsu Kai Nada Daime. So there's an article here about one of the Yakuza groups splitting into 2 different factions and why that factional split endured. And, these characters could be read many different ways, depending upon what other characters are around them. So when the Jesuits said that the Japanese was the devil's language, they're probably referring to the written language. The spoken language is incredibly regular. The problem with Japanese is it only has 5 vowel sounds, which is a, I, u, e, o. So there's a lot of homonyms, and that means and there's a glottal stop too. Like the difference between ita and ita are completely different words. But other than that, it's really hard to distinguish. So sometimes on television, often they will put sort of like subtitles, I guess. Subtitles isn't the right word. Teru is what they call them in Japanese, so that people can be sure they understand what the people are saying.
Before you jump off of this topic here, going into a new country and addressing the culture is one thing at 19 years of age, but then being submersed into a language that you had no idea, how difficult was it for you to acclimate to the Japanese culture, number one, and number two, to the language?
Well, the first thing is I believe like anything, I'm one of those people who if I buy a computer, I read the manual. I read a couple books on Japanese culture. I'm like, okay, this is the culture. So intellectually, I understand it. But also living in the Zen Buddhist temple and interacting with the people and in the neighborhood was very good for like, okay, it's like I'm completely immersed in Japanese society. I'm going to have to get along with my neighbors. I'm going to have to make sure this works. And that was very helpful. And the other thing is, I know people use Duolingo and all these other things to learn languages now. At the time, what I did over and over, what I would call sentence pattern drills. So Japanese has about maybe 225 sentence patterns, sort of ways of saying things. And then, the declension of the verbs is very regular. The declension of the adjectives is very regular. There are a few exceptions. So you learn the verbs and you do the drills, and I would spend like 3 hours a day in the language lab. I mean, it's boring, but you repeat, read, sound, repeat. And then after a while, it sort of gets into your head. And I think that, for me, it felt like almost a kind of enlightenment, like, okay, I need to accept the fact that Japanese is spoken with this presumption that we're not equal. And that's the worldview that I'm going to have to take to get this language right. And that, instead of having prepositions, we have particles, which come after the word. It became, sort of easy. And I liked the Japanese language. I mean, I found, and the other thing I did is like, okay, how do Japanese people themselves learn to read and write and understand this? And I realized like the comic books and stuff written for children, next to the kanji, they have all the readings. So, can see, oh, this is how this would be read out loud. So I read a lot of comic books. I mean, that's probably a crazy way to learn a language. But, I started off with, a lot of comic books for children once I had a certain level of proficiency. And that has certainly helped me learn the language.
If you had our listeners, not really understanding the Japanese culture or the language, what was probably the most difficult thing for you, Jake, when you were making that transition?
I think the most difficult thing is, with some sense, is understanding how important reciprocity is in Japanese society. It's one of the things that I've come to like about it. If someone does you a favor, you better return that favor, or you better remember that favor, because it's going to be called upon you. And if you don't, then your reputation as a person drops. And as a reporter, I learned that really fast. Any small favor that is bestowed upon you, you owe that. You have to remember it. When that's called in, you better pay it back. That was, and the other thing is that Japanese people take their word very seriously. So if you say like, oh yeah, I have a copy of that book, I'll bring it to you. You better bring it to that person, because if you don't, it's clocked into their head. Like, oh yeah, this person doesn't do what they say.
Now, reciprocity can work two ways. If someone does something, does it carry over in Japanese culture? If something does something negative to someone, you're supposed to do that back, or is it mostly from a positive perspective?
Okay, if you're in a Yakuza, that carries back.
Well,
if you're a Japanese gangster, that carries back definitely. Like, you have this duty to, avenge your boss, or what, are the insults bestowed upon you, but not so much. The rest is usually a positive thing. There's this great Japanese saying is, when you curse someone, dig 2 graves. So there's an understanding that holding grudges is probably not in your best interest. So here's this really dilemma that I came upon very early as a crime reporter, is that the bad guys, the Yakuza, are great sources of information, because blackmail and extortion is their bread and butter, right?
Can we stop? Well, can you explain Yakuza to our audience? Basically organized crime, but you can give us a better description than that.
Sure. When we say Yakuza, we're talking about 22 different groups in Japan that all claim to be humanitarian organizations. Some of them have histories as long as 100 years. The Yamaguchi-gumi was founded in 1915. Originally, they were federations of gamblers and street merchants, kind of labor unions. And each group has its own territory and its own sort of money-making enterprises. Extortion and protection money, just like the Italians, was, a staple of their business. You ran a bar or a restaurant in their area, you paid them $300 a month, giving them a steady income. And of course, construction and real estate dealings and blackmail fraud and illegal gambling were always sources of their money. They exist out in the open in Japan because the organizations themselves aren't illegal, which is why you can have Yakuza fan magazines and why they had business cards and why they sometimes do interviews. And if you go to the National Police Agency website, you can find the addresses of the major Yakuza organizations. I mean, I'll show you something that's kind of pretty funky if I still have it here. So this is the Yamaguchi-gumis, was the largest organized crime group in Japan. At one time, they had 40,000 members. So this is from the 5th generation. This is an internal phone book of all their major members and their contacts and their addresses and the other organized crime groups in this area, so that if there was a gang war, they would know who to contact and quickly bring a resolution to it. And it includes like who's on duty for the month. I mean, so all the gangsters' names, their positions, their ranks, their phone numbers, their addresses were all contained in this nice little book, which is basically like a phone book and address book of the members of the Kanto Shinboku-kai, which was like, the association of groups in the Kanto area where I am, like Tokyo, friendly to the Yamaguchi-gumi. And so this is super organized, So basically, like, one of our guys got in a fight with a loan shark and shot him. We don't want a gang war to come out. Okay, who's on call? Let's talk to someone in the Sumio Sky. Let's see if we can resolve this. I mean,
Contrast. What a contrast. I mean, Jim and I have both been exposed to organized crime. Jim in New York, me in Philadelphia, and Jim also in Philadelphia as well, as he was born and raised there. But it's in other words, hey, I'm going to do this to you. And by the way, here's my calling card. And you know what I mean? Don't tell me you have those too.
It's, to have a gang war is bad for business. So there's an incentive, even though these guys are constantly trying to take people's territory, they would send each other business, like New Year's cards, right? Like, to the home of, basically your rival. And even amongst the groups there, you could have a blood brother relationship. Like, let's say the big three are the Yamaguchi-gumi, which is headquartered in Kobe, which has an entire city block as their headquarters. The Sumiyoshi-kai, which has offices in Ginza, and the Inagawa-kai, which has offices in Yokohama, Kawasaki, and one office across from the Ritz-Carlton in Tokyo. If you show up on the first Thursday of every month, you can see all these black Mercedes, and recently Toyota Lexus seems to be loved by the Yakuza, all lined up in the streets. The cops are all sort of sitting around while these guys have their monthly meeting. And the Yakuza fanzines will have these like sort of centerfolds of like who's coming in and out of the monthly meeting and who's rising up and out of the organization.
So, Jake, or what I'm hearing, and maybe I don't know if I'm hearing this right, but it appears that the members of these different criminal organizations are held in extremely high esteem by everybody in the community, to include law enforcement.
Well, in recent years, starting in 2011, when finally nationwide it became a crime to pay off the Yakuza, they have been held in less esteem. So they have gone from 80,000 members to 24,000 members. But since they aren't technically illegal, it's not illegal to be a member of the Yakuza. You can be regulated and your life is hard, especially now with the current laws. But, that itself isn't going to get you arrested. They've had this kind of, social contract with Japan that has allowed them to exist. And to their credit, if you walked into a Yakuza office like 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, you would see on the wall, there would be a list. Here are the things that will get you kicked out of the organization. And they would be no theft, no robbery, no sexual assault, ostensibly no dealing or using drugs, and nothing that is in disharmony with the noble way. So you're not supposed to bother civilians. You're just supposed to do your illegal and legal enterprises, collect your protection money, and go about your business, not bothering other people. I mean, of course, that's not how it really worked, but that was the understanding. And since if you lived and had a Yakuza office in your neighborhood, you actually was very safe. Nobody is going to snatch your purse in the Yakuza neighborhood, because before the police get you, the Yakuza gets you, they're going to beat you to a pulp. So, so there was a tolerance for them, even by the police for many years.
The rumors I've heard over time, at least being on my end, that the Yakuza was very, very violent, or could be very, very violent, more so than even the criminal organized gangs in the United States. Is there truth to that? And what would be the level, Jake? What would be a reason for them to engage in violence? And is there an escalation to them?
Violence amongst the Yakuza is absolutely brutal. I mean, when there's a gang war, I mean, these guys are extremely vicious. I think there was one Yakuza who took a shot at the third generation leader of the Yamaguchi-gumi, Taoko Kazuo. Also, this is kind of an amusing thing about March 28th. I share the birthday of Japan's most famous Yakuza godfather. And when a couple of people I knew in the Yakuza found out about it, they thought it was highly amusing. Like, you have the same birthday as the godfather of godfathers. What does that say? And I said, well, I'm certainly not his reincarnation. That's what that says.
That's good. It's good.
But the attempted assassin, when they found him, he had all his nails pulled off, his teeth had been ripped out, his face had been mutilated, probably while he was alive. So they are extremely vicious to their own. The Yamaguchi-gumi had a split in August 27th, 2015. And that has resulted in a long-running gang war, a gang war that I think actually is charted in this magazine with like locations and deaths and what happened. But to this point, even after almost 10 years of this gang war, not a civilian has been killed. And the police attitude towards Yakuza on Yakuza violence is best summarized in this really dark joke that a cop once told me. What crime is it when a Yakuza kills another Yakuza? Destruction of property.
There you go.
What shows your mindset and what their thought process in is that if I'm part of your organization, I'm just a piece of your property. I'm nothing more than
But the people who join sign into that. They pledge loyalty to the Oyabun and their father figure, and it's kind of cultish in that sense. There's this famous Yakuza saying, if the Oyabun says the passing crow is white, it's white. So there's this demand for incredible loyalty. Now, sometimes that loyalty works both ways. If you are a Yakuza and you assassinate a rival in a gang war, up to a couple years ago, they would take care of you and your family and your mistress because, they recognize that's part of life as well. And when you got out, you would get a cash bonus and move up in the organization. And the Yamaguchi-gumi, after a huge gang war in the 90s, basically recruited a lot of members back by providing a pension plan. So if you can make it to your 60s and retire, you can get like you got a $400,000 to $300,000 lump payment. Thank you very much for your service.
Jake, is there the equivalent of the movie The Godfather, which is about, of course, American La Costa Strip? Is there anything like that in Japan?
There are a lot of Yakuza movies, and a lot of them glorify them. One of my favorite stories is that there is an ex-Yakuza boss in the Yamaguchi-gumi who was the Takegaki Satoru-san, who I like a lot. Now he works a nonprofit organization helping Yakuza rehabilitate society. So he was an extra on a lot of Yakuza films in the 60s, but he wasn't very successful. But one of the Yakuza bosses who was on set as a consultant recruited him. He became an actual Yakuza. So he went from playing a Yakuza to becoming a Yakuza.
Imitating art, I guess, if that's the right order there.
Yeah. Our art becoming life?
Or something like that, yeah. I gotta think about it.
There have been, in 1992, a director, Itami Juzo, made a film that showed the Yakuza as they really are, as scheming, lowlife, fraudsters, violent, thugs, blackmailers, extortionists. The title in Japanese was called Minbo no Onna, and I think the English title is The Gentle Art of Japanese Extortion. And the thrust of that movie was set in an expensive hotel taken over by gangsters and their attempts to the hotel to get rid of these gangsters. The thrust of the movie was that you can take on the Yakuza and win. You don't need to pay them. You don't need to pay them, and you shouldn't. And the response of the Goto-gumi, which was a faction of the Yamaguchi-gumi, was to send 5 people to his apartment. And when he came out, they seized him in his parking lot, and they cut up his face very slowly so it would leave a permanent scar. And Godo Tadamasa, who was the head of the gang, later wrote in his memoir that, of course, I didn't order it, but I was happy that they did it because he dared to make fun of the Yakuza, and that was unpleasant.
Knowing goes even up in that stellar atmosphere of these criminal bosses.
But to their credit, they don't kill police, they don't kill judges, and their use of violence is judicious in the sense, sure, they do kill people. The mayor of Nagasaki was murdered because he tried to keep them out of public works contracts. He tried to make sure that no Yakuza-affiliated company was involved in public construction or public works or any public projects, So yes, they do kill people. They don't do it often because that makes them look bad, because they are telling the world that they're humanitarian organizations. That's why when after there was the earthquake and tsunami and nuclear meltdown in March of 2011, they were very quick to send supplies and diapers and hot food and blankets to the people in the affected areas. As a matter of fact, in one of the weirdest moments of my life, when I came back to Japan after the disaster, I gave a bunch of supplies I brought from the United States to someone in Inagawa Kai because I knew they would actually take it to the people that needed it.
You say there's a lot of money, sometimes $300,000 or $400,000 if someone makes it till they're 60. What is their source of income? Is there part of it that's legitimate and then another part that's not legitimate?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not going to, I have a relative who is allegedly was Meyer Lansky's right-hand man. Not going to talk about it very much because, it's allegations, but,
he's an organized crime guy from the early 1900s, LA, right. Nevada, and Las Vegas, I think.
But even the mafia had their legitimate businesses, and the Yakuza as well. I think Taoka-san said that, every Yakuza should have a real job in addition to their normal job. So, they do have construction companies, and they may pay their employees well. And the difference that they have against a regular construction company is they're also running, collecting protection money from host clubs or hostess clubs, the kind of places where executives go and may spill their secrets to a beautiful woman or have an affair with her. And then they may use that information to blackmail the guy to awarding the contract to their construction company. So, they have a competitive advantage that nobody else has because they're also willing to use violence. But I have a list of organized crime front companies circa 2000. And amongst those companies are companies, not just entertainment companies, but coffee shops, import firms, car repair shops. So a mixture of legitimate and illegitimate companies. A surprising one that a lot of Yakuza run are private investigative firms. And in that case, they sort of double dip. I remember there was this case in Saitama where there was a gang shooting. 2 guys got shot by, I think, Nakano Kai members. And I think the victims were Kokusui Kai members. And I went to the scene of the crime, and, you could see there was Toho Tante Jimusho, which was basically Eastern Europe private investigation firm. And this Yakuza group was running 3 private investigative firms in Tokyo listed in the yellow pages. And apparently, that was a legitimate part of their business. But sometimes, let's say the wife of a doctor hires the firm to find out if her husband's committing infidelity. They would find out, yeah, he's committing infidelity. They would tell the wife, no, your husband's in the clear. We've cleared him. Then they would go to the husband and say, hey, you're screwing your wife. She wants if she finds out she's gonna get a divorce, pay us and we won't tell her the truth. And so, they're making money both ways.
Extorting money, yeah, sure.
The first PIs to do that. So are these groups involved at all in Japanese pornography and or the human trafficking you're talking about?
Human trafficking, the Yakuza were heavily involved because it's a big money-making thing. I mean, I could break down the economics of why human trafficking is a big moneymaker. Starting in about 2000, and I worked for the State Department, a State Department-sponsored project from 2006 to 2008, investigating how human trafficking was working in Japan and which politicians were being paid off and who were their political connections, making sure that there weren't harsher laws on the books. That included former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, not to his credit. And I think the State Department leaned on Japan so heavily that they decided to actually put laws on the books and enforce them. So Japan is a destination country for human trafficking. has drastically declined. Unfortunately, what has sort of replaced human trafficking internationally is domestic human trafficking. And the system is usually that there are these things in Japan called host clubs. And a host club is where you have attractive men who have women who come into these bars and drink expensive champagne and wine, and the men compliment them. Sometimes they dance with them. And sometimes they let them drink for free at the beginning, and then they gradually build up such a heavy debt. They will build up enough of a heavy debt. They introduce them to a loan shark to pay off the debts. And then the loan shark introduces them to a sex club where they work off their debts to the loan shark. Now, sex work in Japan is legal. Every single kind of sexual activity that you could offer or buy is legal except vaginal penetration. And even that is legal depending upon the license of the establishment.
Presumably above 18.
Presumably above 18.
Age of 18, yes.
Let me ask you this, Jake. You've been covering this group for 20 years. Is that fair?
30 years. 30 years. 30 years.
30 years. And over the time you covered that, has anything adverse happened to you or something that you were concerned about because of what you wrote?
Well, I was trying to write about this Yakuza boss, Goto Tadamasa, and 3 other Yakuza, one from the Matsubakai, another from Gotogumi, another from Miyogumi, getting liver transplants at UCLA. And somehow that leaked out. And the National Police Agency summoned me to their office and said, there appears to be a contract on you. We're going to put you under police protection. I lasted for about 5 years. That was definitely adverse. I've certainly been threatened verbally. And when I was working on the human trafficking report for the State Department, I stupidly went into a Russian Yakuza-owned club. Like the girls from Russia, I think the Yakuza ran it, and wasn't very careful and nearly got choked to death. So yeah, there have been adverse circumstances. And then I had one source. I mean, this is really tricky. I mean, I know that sources for the police, your informants and the relationships journalists have with their sources is a different thing. But I had this one good source who was a meth addict, and he was in the middle of a meth psychosis. And I said something to him that sent him off, and he beat the crap out of me. And we just had this horrible knockdown brawl. I mean, I got the upper hand probably just out of luck, so I was able to walk out. But I couldn't turn him into the cops because he's my source. That was pretty scary.
Punches thrown usually are scary. So out of all this, you wound up writing, I'm not sure it was your first book, but certainly Tokyo Vice.
So Tokyo Vice was my first book.
From a lot of these stories. And you have a Tokyo Noir we're going to talk about. And then next thing you know, it's an HBO series.
Well, it was nice. I also
That's
wrote
kind
this.
Of cool.
It was great, man. Hey, now I have this is how I paid off this house. It's nice to have a house in Tokyo. The second book, The Last Yakuza, which you guys would really like, because I mean, it's not a memoir about me. It's a memoir of like all these Yakuza bosses I knew over the years and I interviewed. That took years to get published because I ran into this incredibly weird dilemma when I'd finished writing it, which is that Japan decided to repeal the statute of limitations on murder and manslaughter, and I think even attempted murder, except they made it retroactive. They did this in 2010. So imagine you've interviewed all these Yakuza bosses who are talking about people that they've killed because 30 years have gone by and they don't really have any regrets and they think it can't touch them. And suddenly then it can. So as a journalist, right, you guys have your rules and we have our rules is if it's not off the record, I can use it. But if somebody tells me something thinking that they can't be held responsible for it and suddenly they can, so what do I do with that? So I had to rewrite the whole book. And then there was one chapter that's in the English edition, not in the French edition, about Yakuza on Yakuza kidnapping that someone made me swear I would never write while they were alive. And they passed away during the pandemic. So I'm like, okay, I guess I can.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you believe that the Yakuza are active here in the United States?
I believe in a very limited way. They have some businesses that they own in Hawaii. They have some clubs that they operate in Las Vegas. They're not very good at international operations. The Obama administration put the major gangs on an OFAC list, and the Treasury Department has been very good about finding their assets in the United States and seizing, starting in 2015.
Let's switch gears back to the U.S.
Okay.
And we can come back to Tokyo and the Vice and Noir. Starting in 1992, first of all, your father was a pathologist in Columbia, Missouri, right?
He still is the chief of pathology at the Harry S. Truman VA Hospital at 88.
Okay.
And
Nice.
and the acting county coroner, because the last coroner quit. They couldn't find someone to replace him, so they asked my dad to come back.
God bless him.
Absolutely. I hope I'm still doing, Ray and I are still doing this podcast when I'm 88. And Jake,
I
you're
hope
invited
you guys
back.
are too.
Jake, that's only a couple of years away for.
There's chronological age and behavioral age. You know the difference, right? However, we have sort of, you're doing a podcast now. Besides this one, you're doing another one, and I have it written down here somewhere. Witness Night Shift. And it's about this angel of death case in Columbia, Missouri, that at least from what I could read, 1992 is when these deaths started being uncovered. And your father played a role in that. He took some heat for some early opinions he gave, along with some others. Walk us through what you know about that, your father's role, and I worked the Michael Swango case a little bit. He's another well-known.
The guy they called, there's a great New Yorker album about called Professional Courtesy. I know the Swango case, man. You worked the Swango case? That's amazing.
I did some of it. I was this close to going to Zimbabwe to interview some people there, but something else broke when I was in the FBI. So, and there's other dangers of death around the country. The UK has a number of them. These are usually medical professionals. It could be doctors, could be nurses, and they, for whatever reason, there's several different reasons they do it. They decide to kill their patients by different means.
Didn't they call him Double O Schwango or something? Like that was his nickname because he was so many people died.
I think that was, yes, but he's accused of killing upwards of 60. He admitted to 4, and now he's in the Supermax in Florence, Colorado. He's about 70 years old now, and hopefully, he'll spend the rest of his life there. But walk us through what you know about this Columbia case. It was a veterans hospital, right?
Right. So
Harry S. Truman Medical Hospital.
Yeah. Harry S. Truman Veterans Hospital, which I volunteered at when I was a teenager. It's a great hospital. I mean, I think that people forget that the only thing we have, the equivalent of socialized medicine in the United States, is the VA hospital. 1992, my father was subbing for Earl Dick, who was the chief of staff, and a couple nurses came to my father and said, "We think there's a nurse killing patients. The number of deaths on Ward 4 East is sky high, and we want you to look into it." And so my father asked Dr. Gordon Christensen, his colleague and the chief researcher, to look into it.
Epidemiologist, right?
Epidemiologist. Because,
Yep.
my father was thinking, well, that's kind of crazy. Maybe there's some kind of outbreak of an infectious disease. There's a lot of things that can kill people in a hospital when they have an outbreak.
Jake, just for our audience, what is an epidemiologist?
An epidemiologist is someone who studies disease and its outbreaks and its effects, and a statistical analysis of why people get sick. So Dr. Gordon Christensen took a look at it, and he assigned all the nurses a number, so he wasn't having bias, right? So he was kind of a blind test, like each nurse on the ward got a number. And after about 3 days, he came to my father and he said, "Nurse H is killing patients. He may have killed more than 40 patients. He's murdering them." And my father was like, wait, murder is a big word there. Like, are you sure? And Gordon crunched the numbers, and my father, as acting chief of staff, immediately removed this Nurse H, from patient care. And he went to the director of the hospital, Joseph Kurzieski, and he said, "We need to remove Williams from all patient care, and we also need to call in the FBI." And
Richard Williams is his name.
Nurse Richard Williams. And Kurzieski first seemed to be on board, and then there was a call between Kurzieski and Falcone, who was above him in the VA system. And my father was listening to the conference call, and Falcone said, "Hey, Joe, aren't you on the verge of retirement? The last time we had to call in the FBI, we fired the chief of staff and the director. Is this what you really want?" And that began a massive attempt to cover it.
Wow. Because of the potential for bad publicity.
For the potential for bad publicity.
People losing jobs, maybe going to jail, even bosses conceivably, not just the bad guy, the angel of death.
Yeah, you can see what a public relations disaster that would be if that got out. But they couldn't keep it out because eventually some of the nurses, and I think, after watching what was going on, and I think, and the director tried to reinstate Williams as a patient nurse. I think they were all contemplate going to the press. And then two nurses approached Ken Jacob, who was a Missouri state legislator, who was so horrified that he contacted Rudy Keller, which was a regular reporter. And then the news came out. And then when the news came out, they actually had to investigate. Wow. And then the FBI was called in, and the FBI did an investigation. But you guys at the FBI, I was surprised when going all through all this material that the charges that the actual charges they were investigating, that this case was civil rights violation.
That's kind of a catch-all if they can't charge them with anything else. I'm not sure if they were older. Well, they probably were older patients, or if they were patients of color, but that's kind of a catch-all when other charges can't be made, right?
Well, I guess if you kill someone, you deprive them of their life, life, liberty, and happiness. The Mississippi Burning movie, where the Klansmen were investigated for killing civil rights workers, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that was also a civil rights violation case.
Yes, but it depends a lot on who the agents are that are assigned at the outset of this thing and kind of the initial investigation. You really have to have the right agent or agents involved to do that. If you don't, and sometimes it's outside of their comfort zone, or they may not have the knowledge, which is usually very, in my estimation, in the Bureau is very unusual, because everybody that I've ever come across in the Bureau is extremely sharp. But I find it...
there are exceptions, Ray. There are exceptions.
But I find it very disturbing to me that you have pathology reports and you're seeing a pattern, and yet the only thing you're coming up with is that, and that's before, Jim, they instituted the statute for serial killers. I don't think that came out till like 2008, maybe 7, when that came out, Jim.
I think it was a little before that, but yeah, we basically have a serial killer here with Mr. Williams, and it turns out he was charged with 10 homicides in 2002. But then he had, I guess, a decent defense attorney who argued he got the charges dropped out.
Well, let's backtrack a little bit now. I'll break this down for you because it's interesting.
Sure.
The special agent in charge, Phil Williams, who I would love to talk to, or Wayne Kessler, who was the special investigations guy for the VA, neither of who will talk to me. I think Phil did a really good job. Ironically, his name was Phil Williams, who was pursuing Richard Williams.
Oh, yeah, right.
And there was also Bob Wright was on the case early on. I would love to talk to these two guys. I understand why maybe they don't want to talk to me because the investigations ultimately failed. And that's got to suck. But, they exhumed 13 bodies. They weren't able to identify the cause of death. And while Richard Williams left the VA hospital with a recommendation from the director, and he went to an Ashland nursing home where 30 patients died, which was 5 times the normal amount in the period that he was there compared to the period before he was there.
This is after, Jake. This is after the VA. He goes to a nursing home, and it's 5 times the amount of people that are dying there compared to what they did in the VA hospital.
Yeah. Amongst these, I have like boxes and boxes of documents. There's also this note in one of these documents that in December of 1992, Richard Williams worked at a nursing home in Columbia, Missouri, and 2 patients died that weekend. And that was also reported to the director of the VA hospital. So if he actually is guilty of killing the people that he's suspected of killing people, it would be 72 people. That would be a huge number. But the statute of limitations passed out. The VA, the FBI informed the families that their investigation wasn't conclusive.
But it doesn't. Homicide doesn't have any statute.
Well, the statute of limitations for the FBI investigation passed, and they said, we can't investigate this anymore because 5 years passed.
Maybe.
Yeah, there's something amiss there, but some of these state charges could be brought against someone in that regard. Michael Swango was also promoted, I'm using air quotes, to a few different hospitals after he was already a suspect. He was a medical doctor, and he was moved from one place to another. It's amazing how these people will get other jobs, and these aren't the only 2 that this has happened to.
By the way, one of the really bizarre things that came out of this podcast is that in the comments, there was the librarian from the VA hospital wrote in and said, yeah, everything in this podcast is true. It's amazing. I'm wondering why this was never solved. I remember Richard Williams checking out 2 books. One of them was on toxicology. It's a very expensive book. The FBI never gave it back. Do you think that they could return it? And I was like, what?
With the overdue charges, compounded daily. Jeez.
Jake, what's his status now, Williams?
So you mentioned 2002, right? So he was arrested in 2002 on the basis of supposedly a new test that found succinylmonocholine in the tissue samples from the bodies that were exhumed. Now, succinylcholine is a paralyzing agent often used at the time before surgery. Certainly kill you if it's given to you in a large enough dose. But unfortunately, I think it was the national laboratories that did the test. Unfortunately, the test found succinylmonocholine in about everything, including like someone bought a steak from the hospital, like from the supermarket, did the test on it, and it had succinylmonocholine.
Right.
So the prosecutor at the time, Kevin Crane, who was kind enough to give me an interview, he said to me basically, like I will do my Kevin Crane impression, like Jake, looking at this evidence, and I have to try the case on the evidence, and I could not make that case because the evidence scientifically did not stand up in court. And as a prosecutor, you only get one shot, and if you screw it up, he can never be tried again. So I had to drop the charges. That doesn't mean he's not guilty, but that does mean I could not take the case.
I would love to know. I know you said, they found it in everything. They found this drug, and I can't even pronounce it, but they found this drug. And my question is, what were the levels, in a steak versus in a body? What were the levels? You said given a large enough dose that it could kill somebody.
Well, the problem is that there wasn't enough of a concentration of succinylmonocholine in the tissue samples they had to show that it was above normal. Now, there is an interesting case. The Havram family interviewed sued the VA for wrongful death, and Judge Nanette Lowry in the civil suit said that the preponderance of the evidence was that Richard Williams gave an overdose of codeine to Elsie Havram and killed him. And therefore, the VA hospital, which was aware as early as June of the year that he died, that there were irregularities and deaths associated with Richard Williams, was culpable, and the family was awarded $450,000. It's kind of like an O.J. Simpson thing. In a civil case, Judge Lowry found that the evidence was, the preponderance of the evidence was that Richard Williams had killed a patient using codeine, because the levels were far exceeding what would be found if someone had just taken a Tylenol with codeine. And then in that one case, that was the conclusion.
From a behavioral perspective, I remember working the Swango case. There's 3 reasons these medical-related angels of death tend to undertake these types of this type of murderous activity. One is just to perform a mercy killing. They think this patient's not going to survive anyway, put them out of their misery. Of course, that's not their role to do that at their job. They're sadistic is another reason. They just have an overwhelming desire to hurt people. There's no way of hurting people any worse than actually killing them. And also what they call the malignant hero. That's someone who will see someone really sick, especially a nurse or a doctor, then rush in the room and try to resuscitate them and kind of look like a hero, but they're actually already dead. It's also known as Munchausen by proxy, and it's related to that. So these are the 3 types of behavioral factors that contribute to these people that commit these types of crimes.
Well, let me feed you some information, and you can tell me how you interpret this. When he was on duty, the number of code blues, and a code blue is basically a resuscitation order for someone who is dying or near death or has died and has no life signs. The number of code blues rose so much when he was on duty that his nickname among people in the pharmacy department was Mr. Blue. So there were a lot of code blues where he came in and he saved the patient. A number of these patients were not sick. Were not terminally. Some of them were scheduled to leave the hospital the next day. There was at least one patient who basically had missed the ambulance to take him back to the nursing home and was just spending the night. I think the VA hospitals called that social admission. So we aren't talking about people on the edge of death.
Right.
There was a kind of BSU analysis, and I have the faxes about it, though I FOIA'd the FBI and they glow-marred me, which means they won't tell me whether the analysis exists or doesn't exist. It basically said, we suspect that the person who's doing this has a very weak ego, and by asserting their authority, by having this power of life and death, that they empower themselves. And that Richard Williams himself was a pudgy fellow, he was very white, prematurely balding. Judging by the transcripts and interviews with his wife and others, he was a closeted homosexual, but also married, and felt very powerless in his life, but was also very smart. He had been fired from his previous job before working at the VA for falsifying records about saying that he had given patients their medicine when he hadn't. And there's an interview with him in which, after these accusations came out, where he said this very curious thing is like, I cannot believe that people are accusing me of murder. I didn't become a nurse to kill people. I became a nurse to save people. And this is all a huge blow to my ego.
Sounds like he's a poster child for aberrant behavior and sociopath, if not psychopath, and fits right into the angel of death mystique, no doubt, and not a good one in that regard.
Well, definitely what you said, Jake, is absolutely true about power and control. It's all about power and control with this individual. And he continued to do that. I don't know if I missed it. What is his status? Is he still around? Is he still working? Is he retired?
He eventually gave up his nursing license because he got in some trouble. He wasn't disbarred. He allegedly gave it up according to reports. The last job I know that he had was working in a funeral home somewhere in St. Louis around 2020.
Well, those patients, quote unquote, should be saved.
There should be. But the ironic thing about that is he enjoys being around death. You know, he really enjoys that aspect of things.
It would certainly seem that way.
And, go ahead, finish, Jake.
I mean, so in digging up this story, which for many years I wanted to write about, but I was living in Japan, right? That's not my jurisdiction. I guess one of the great things about having the TV show done is that, and doing a podcast with Sony previously called Evaporated, was that I had the time and the willingness to take a really low salary to work on this podcast and go home for a couple months and do it. I benefited by the fact that, my father has kept all the documents from that time, and reporters have tried to write about it, and they left him with the documents. And John Kurtz, who took the Havram family case, in the civil lawsuit against the VA, let me go through his 16 boxes of documents. So I have all the FBI interviews. And as Gordon Christensen, the epidemiologist who basically was harassed and forced out of the VA for daring to, pursue this matter, also gave me some interviews and left me some stuff. So we were able to put this thing together. And of course, the Government Accountability Office did a very in-depth investigation of the VA's own investigation and found that there was essentially a cover-up. So I had all these documents, and it seemed like this was the time to do it, while people who can remember it are still alive. And my father's 88, but he's not going to live forever. So I was very glad that Sony Music Entertainment gave us the go sign to do this podcast.
And once again, that podcast, if I have it right, is Witnessed Night Shift. Okay. Your first book, Tokyo Vice, your second book, Tokyo Noir, and both very interesting. What I read, the TV series on HBO, is, of course, Tokyo Vice. We have a question from one of our fans.
Okay.
And they would like to know if Michael Mann is involved in season 2 of Tokyo Vice as much as he was in season.
No, he was not very much involved in season 2 because he was working on writing his sequel to Heat and the movie Ferrari. So he was kind of an absentee dad on season 2.
That happens. But he's a full-time dad with those other children, it seems like.
I like Michael Mann a lot. Now, J.T. Rogers, who is the showrunner, and this is like Hollywood vocabulary, the showrunner is the person who makes sure that the whole thing is cohesive and consistent. We went to high school together.
Huh.
He became a famous playwright. He won a Tony Award for his play about the Israeli-Palestinian peace talks in Norway called Oslo, which was a great dark comedy. That gave him the clout to sort of get the TV series cleared. And since he and I are good friends, even though the story departs from, the TV series departs from real life events, it's as authentic as can be. So we had a really good time. I can't say that he and Michael Mann got along very well. So sometimes I got caught in the middle of that. But, one of the things I liked and really respected about Michael Mann is that he wanted it to be as authentic as possible. So he asked me probing questions. I took him out to drink with some organized crime police officers. He asked really good questions. I did Aikido with the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department for 2.5 years. And so, but when he heard that, he felt that Ansel Elgort should also do Aikido and learn it as well. So he did. And it's the Aikido as a, the popular form is very gentle, but the Tokyo metropolitan version of it is brutal. And the only reason I ended up doing it with them is because Larry Futa, who's a retired special agent, was the legal attaché at the U.S. Embassy. At the time, I was still on the police beat, and he wanted to learn Aikido, but his Japanese wasn't very good. So the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department basically told me, you are going to be his partner and his interpreter, and you are going to learn Aikido with him. And it wasn't like I had a choice.
As often happens in the
I did it for years until I ruined one of my shoulders, so I'm going to have to find a new martial art. But it was a good experience.
Jake, I took Aikido from the time I was 17 to about 21 years of age. I got to the level of brown belt, never got past that. But it was pretty interesting. I took it over in New Jersey.
Yeah, I mean,
very interesting.
You had to learn to speak New Jersey when you took it there, right?
Water, or I just got back from Boston today in the yard over there with the woof. As they say in Boston, what a place.
Yeah. Aikido is great. It is hard to master to the point where it's practical. I think I've used it once successfully in my life, and I was quite pleased with myself. Mostly when this obnoxious French guy was touching the ass of my roommate at a bar. And it was I grabbed his hand and put him in a lock and said, like, do you want to leave or do you want me to break your arm? I felt very macho. That's it. That's the only time it's been useful to me.
Well, I'm sure your roommate's ass very much appreciated that. I meant that, seriously. And your roommate. Go. Tell us about your roommate that we're going to wind up here.
My roommate is great, Michelle Johnson. She's married this nice German guy she met here in Tokyo and somewhere living in Dubai. She's a great roommate.
No Frenchman for her, though, from this point on.
No Frenchman for her.
Jake, anything, websites? We mentioned your books, but feel free to mention anything again. People want to contact you, whatever.
I've got 3 books. There's Tokyo Vice, The Last Yakuza. If you're into Yakuza, it's great. Tokyo Noir is the new book. And I have a website, japansubculture.com, which has a lot of information about organized crime. If you dig through it, it's not very well organized. And 2 podcasts, The Evaporated, about missing people in Japan, and Witness Night Shift. That's it. That's my entire creative output, and the TV series.
That ain't too shabby. Ray, final words, and I'll take us out.
I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal. I'll send you an email. Send me your address. I'll send you a signed copy of my book if you send me one of yours.
Absolutely. I would love to do it. I'll send you the whole set.
That'd be fantastic, Jake.
The trilogy, like the Tokyo Vice trilogy.
Absolutely.
I don't think there's going to be a 4th one, because what am I going to write now? Tokyo Vice Rest Home? Or,
Why not? Why, Jake? Why not? Because you got to do the full Monty here. You know what I mean? Why not?
No. At 55, I'm very, very settled down. Over in the next room is my sweetheart, who is works in hotel management and is a black belt in karate, Jesse Nakamura. There's a little bit of an age gap there, but it's working out okay.
Good.
I have no doubt it is, and hopefully she has the old system of speaking very politely and respectfully to her older master.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's why I love her.
Well, that was a setup question. I had a feeling it wasn't. And on that setup question, and a very great interview, Jake, thank you again for joining us on Cold Red. Everybody, make sure you follow us on all the social media sites, coldredpodcast.com. Like us, subscribe to us, all those type things. Thanks to our producers, Matt McLaughlin, Matt Robinson, our music guy, Rick Schilling, and everyone here. We will see you next time on Cold Red.
Thank you very much for having me.